Welcome to Trade Finance Talks TV. Here we are at ICC Austria's Trade Finance Week, and I am joined by Luca Castellani from UNCITRAL. Luca, welcome to Trade Finance Talks TV.
Thank you for having me.
So, the godfather of Melita, as we said last night. Quick introduction, who are you, where are you from, and what do you do?
Yes, I'm an Italian, actually. I work for the Secretariat of the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, and I deal there with digital trade and international sale of goods. And the reason why you see me from time to time in this space is because I was the secretary of the working group that prepared the UNCITRAL model law on electronic transferable records, or our beloved Melita.
Absolutely, and actually, I didn't finish our interview last time because I should have asked you one more question. How did the name Melita come about?
I have to say, this came from my dear colleague who was going to school with a girl called Melita in Australia. And so he decided that this was the best way and the easiest way to refer to the model law, and I completely agree with him. It's such a sweet name, and I really like to think Melita is a lady. Right? She's always been a lady to me, I don't know.
Well, now we know the real story, and you've made Melita famous. I'm not going to ask you to give an extensive definition because we've covered it in the past, but could you give a quick introduction to what Melita actually is and what this means for the digitalization of trade?
That's quite simple. We have seen, of course, in the last few decades, progressive digitization of all commercial documents, all but one specific type. What we call in English transferable documents and instruments, which, however, we define based on their function. They incorporate the right to the delivery of goods or to the payment of a sum of money. And of course, here we are in trade finance. So we have bills of lading, we have warehouse receipts, bills of exchange, promissory notes, checks, and so on and so forth. So these documents, of course, because of their function, which has been there for centuries, they are at the core of trade financing. But the problem is they were developed historically based on the use of paper and based on the possession, the physical possession of the document. So we needed a little bit of time and a little bit of experience and a little bit of trial and error to find the legal requirements that allow to establish the perfect equivalence between the paper-based and the electronic document.
Got it. So we're not going to talk about the UK because that's what we covered in the last interview. Outside of that, can you give any updates on the adoption and enactment of Melita amongst some of the other G7 economies and nations?
Well, the UK had the great merit of bringing these to the forefront, because the first global endorsement of Melita came at the G7 under the British presidency. And now, of course, we have the G7 countries moving. Actually, we have to say, for instance, in the US, all the legislation is there and has been there for a bit. The issue is some of it is used regularly, like warehouse receipts and promissory notes. And some, like the bills of lading part. The law is there, but hasn't been used yet, or very few applications. There's maybe a couple of applications recently, but for many years it was not used. And interestingly, Germany is in a similar position. They had legislation that legally enabled the use of most of these documents. But that legislation has not been used. And on the one hand, business really now wants to use it, but on the other hand, they want to get more guidance on how to use it. And so that legislation has the fundamental principles. It is compatible with Melita. Now, the option that is on the table in Germany is to adopt Melita by way of implementing regulation. And, you know, Spain is, for bills of lading, Spain is in a similar position. So interestingly, some of the laws are there, but they were not used yet. So maybe it's a matter of going to the critical mass. At the G7 level, we have Japan has a very interesting study group that is working on bills of lading based on Melita. Japan has had a law based on different principles on electronic promissory notes for quite some time. They are called electronically recorded monetary claims, and they work in a slightly different one. And then, of course, we're all waiting. France did a great job in writing a white paper that maps both legal and business issues. And we are waiting for this paper to be made available to the public. Any day, you got to learn French, but it's really interesting. I was privileged to participate in the preparation of the legal part. And I have to say that will be a game changer for the countries that have legal systems similar to France, or like, say, Italy, or even Spain itself, or Latin America. So this is what's going on at the G7 level, and you see, one way or the other, all the countries, or almost all the countries, are moving, have moved, are on the way. So we are getting there.
And what about emerging markets?
Emerging markets, we have seen interest. Well, you know, now most of the countries that have already adopted Melita are actually emerging markets in one way or the other. I don't know how. Well, Singapore maybe not so emerging market, but well settled, but still different from what we were talking about. China has expressed a really strong interest in Melita, and is cooperating with the Asian Development Bank. The Asian Development Bank has a facility to support Melita consideration, and two countries it's working in now are China and Georgia. India actually now in the framework of the G20 has expressed interest for considering Melita, although we are at a quite early stage there. And these, of course, are already two big game changers. There's also another line that has to do with the implementation of the digital economy agreements, actually, that Singapore is concluding. And quite a few countries like Australia, New Zealand, Chile have adopted. And inside there is an article that asks the parties to consider the adoption of Melita. So we have quite some movements there. And then, of course, we go down to the country level, and different countries are looking at Melita in different ways, from different perspectives.
Yeah, and it's that different perspectives is actually really important, and we'll talk about how it's actually utilized in different countries a bit later on. But before that, is there, you mentioned ADB, is there a role for multilateral development banks to push this forward in their kind of countries?
By all means. ADB is partnering with ICC DSI, and they have made significant progress. But now there was last month, I think, the launch of a similar initiative by the EBRD. We hope that the other development banks will come on board. Some of them are already involved in ICC DSI, and I think this gives the bigger picture, because for banks, of course, this is about making trade financing more efficient. But there are broader implications, because once we shift towards digitization, we have, for instance, easier compliance, better governance, a possibility to take into account ESG in the supply chain. So there's broader implications which are really important for development banks, and that we should not forget when we think of the impact. Just even the environmental impact of not having all of this paper going around, and printing it and sending it. Yeah. So that's already something.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess looking at the nations that have already implemented and enacted MLETR or equivalent in their markets, such as, say, Bahrain, can you see any significant use of electronic transferable records and documents?
I believe that now, of course, we are looking for applications, and we say, well, this is all good and well. We have the model law, we have the political support, we passed the law. Then what? Yeah, and then we got to take advantage of it, and I know that in Bahrain there was an effort to use electronic checks Now, this is interesting because, for instance, in continental Europe, where some countries like Germany, there's no check at all. So this is teaching us that each country has its own needs. And what was done there is that the solution was developed at the level at the national level by a commercial company that is actually a consortium of all the banks. So all the banks, all the retail banks, in this case commercial banks, that wanted to take advantage of this, could participate in this effort and could offer to their clients this application. And this was actually very successful. I understand that hundreds of thousands of electronic checks have already been issued, and these are electronic checks which are fully negotiable. And they are important in the local market because some people don't have bank accounts, for instance, immigrant workers. Yeah. So there is also a social element to it. So in a way, this was a big lesson learned for me, because when we were preparing Melita, we thought checks, at the end of the day, checks are important, say, in the US. But in Europe, well, you know, we give a payment order and, you know, we do a wire transfer or something like that. And so we didn't think the check would be the document where the revolution would start from. And then, you know, comes a developing country with a different, slightly different legal system, you know, and with an actual need. And then where we go, we have the first killer app.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess you mentioned earlier the snowball effect. I mean, you know, final question, how do we really engage countries all around the world and trigger that snowball effect and mass adoption?
It's not easy. I already said adoption of the model law, by all means, it does not mean that, you know, we're flicking the magic switch. There is the serious need to rethink business processes. A lot of this digitization is about transposing what already exists on paper and doing the same things, just, you know, with something which is more or less electronic. Mm-hmm. In the beginning, even scanned, which is like you cannot access the information. This is not possible. Nowadays, we know everything is about data flows, data reuse, data analysis. Data is precious. Data is the new oil. I would disagree with that, but it's okay. Because oil doesn't get old, data gets old, but that's fine. Let's not get into that. But we need to rethink business processes. Of course, the first successful applications will be like the electronic check in Bahrain. They will be at the domestic level, because they can be controlled better. Mm-hmm. And of course here we are all looking for this, you know, elusive goal of the bill of lading, but the bill of lading is cross-border. But we already have live transactions based on Melita on electronic bills of lading. We should be ambitious, but also realistic. And so digitize what we can now and not exaggerate in trying to have 100% of the partners on from the very beginning, because some will come little by little. But the benefit of having best quality data in the system under control is such that it will become evident to everyone. As soon as there is an application that is just slightly visible on the global scene, that you know, we will really trigger that snowball effect. And you know, as I said, the panorama of global laws is changing fast. So I think in a couple of years we will have enough large economies that this can happen.
Thank you very much, Luca, and thank you very much for all the work that you've been doing all around the world to really drive this crucial evolution, not necessarily revolution. Luca, thank you.
Thank you for having me.